See, sometimes the media have just decided it's time for a change. Now, remember, they went all in and virtually laughed at the idea of the coalition winning the last election. They laughed at you for saying that you didn't want to buy Bill Shorten. We can, of course, sit here and replay all of the grabs and show you all of the newspapers, but that was yesterday's news. Today's news is, interestingly, how the media is doing everything it can to try to guarantee the result they couldn't achieve in 19, they will be able to achieve next year. The embarrassment that they felt when the quiet Australians rejected the policies of Labor, including, remember, about negative gearing, which, of course, would, among other things, have seen some changes in house prices, which would have, of course, seen changes in interest rates. But anyway, by the by, I've already mentioned that. Well, as you know, regardless of net zero, and I don't want to keep talking about that anymore either, but at the last election, both the Labor Party and the Liberal Party had targets for 2030. You see, of course, we don't hire governments for 40 years. We hire them for 3 years at a time. And clearly, 2030 is a lot closer than 2040 or 2050. Now, at the last election, the Labor Party was absolutely whacked over the head because they wanted a 45% emission cut by 2030. The federal government, well, they made the deal in Paris, of course, negotiated under Abbott, locked in under Turnbull, and reaffirmed in the election of 2019 under Morrison. The rates currently of carbon reduction under the Paris Agreement and under what people agreed to in 2019 is 27% of your 2005 levels by 2030. Now, that 2030 number is what you've heard about in the past few days when people say that countries like Australia need to increase our 2030 targets. But here's the fun bit. America isn't lifting their 2030 targets, and Australia doesn't have to leave their 2030 targets either. So whatever pissing and moaning you may have heard about net zero 2050, as reasonable as some of that may be, 2030 clearly comes before 2050. And the Prime Minister has made it very clear that he will not be making any changes between now and 2030 to the target that was, of course, negotiated by Abbott, locked in by Turnbull, reaffirmed by the Australian people at the 2016 and 2019 elections. Here is what he had to say today to my colleague Andrew Clennell.
Are you ruling out a more ambitious 2030 target for COP27 if you're elected?
Well, all that happened at COP26 was all countries noted a request to revisit these things. But I've been very clear about what our target is and that we will meet and beat it. See, we are going to achieve a 35% reduction in emissions by 2030. That's what we're going to achieve. And that's what actually matters. So we're well above our target.
Why don't you make that your target then, if you're going to get to 35% anyway?
Because our policy is to meet and beat. That's what we do.
So it's quite bizarre that if you have a target and you're going to beat it, well, why would you need to change it to the number you're going to beat it by, apart from then just to say we've changed our target? But what I find particularly misleading, and why I say the media has already made its decision about which way you're going to vote next year, is they let Anthony Albanese say things like this, attacking the government for not increasing its 2030 climate target.
Australia's report card is a definite fail, and that's why the conference has agreed that countries like Australia that refuse to increase their 2030 target have to return to the next conference in 2022 with a higher target. The government itself is saying that it will achieve that amount by doing nothing, and they have no plan for 2030 outlined.
But I think regular viewers of the program know the point I'm about to make next. Labor complains that the government's target isn't high enough while not having a target at all for the same period of time. This is the each way elbow strategy, which is to get all of the political advantage of moaning that the government isn't doing enough while not actually having any target whatsoever, which doesn't mean they don't have a climate policy. They do. It's just they won't tell you until after you've elected them. Oh, and by the way, unlike 2030 targets, unlike 2050 targets under the government, this bloke will legislate it. What comes before 2050? 2030. And in 2022, there will be a decision about who we hire for the next 3 years that take us all the way, of course, to 2025, halfway to 2030. By his own admission, Anthony Albanese thought that 45 was too much. Is the Goldilocks politics here to say 35% will be their number because that's the aspiration of the government? Who knows? I think it was stupid of the government to say what its aspiration was in terms of 35% because it removes whatever remaining political advantage there is. But make no mistake, the Labor Party has to come up with a target for 2030. But because the media have already decided the way you're going to vote, they've already decided it is over, game, set and match, this bloke's the next Prime Minister, that they let him get away with no follow-up question like, okay, but what's your target for 2030? Yeah, sure, good point, but what's your target for 2030? Instead, you will hear all day on the radio, all day on the television, in every newspaper, no one ever points this out. Because seemingly, just like in 2019, they are absolutely certain of what the result is going to be. Well, just like we were in 19, I'm not certain about what's happening in 2022. I see it as a fork in the road. Yet again, because that's what elections are about. I see good choices and bad choices. And the idea of electing a government that is promising to go harder but won't tell you how hard they will go when it comes to climate targets of 2030, which they have to be put in place from 2022, 23, 24, 25. Well, they're trying to pull a Swiftie here. But that's what the media does all day, every day.